When I met Jenna, she was electric. She didn't just walk into a room, she commanded it. Her laugh could make strangers stop mid-conversation, and her sharp wit could leave anyone scrambling to keep up. She wasn't just beautiful. She was magnetic, the kind of person who drew everyone in without even trying. I wasn't immune to it. If anything, I was her biggest fan, captivated by the energy she brought into my life. When we got married, I thought I'd finally found my forever. I envisioned us as this unstoppable duo. Me, the steady anchor, and her, the whirlwind of excitement. It worked for a while, too. Our differences complemented each other, balancing out our individual flaws. But somewhere along the way, that balance shifted. At first, I didn't notice the cracks. They were subtle, easy to dismiss. Jenna had always been flirtatious, but it felt harmless. Something that came with her charm, part of the package that made her who she was. She could light up a conversation with anyone, and I'd always loved that about her. But over time, the harmless became harder to ignore. It started small. A lingering glance at a waiter during dinner. A laugh that felt a little too enthusiastic at someone else's joke. Little things that, on their own, wouldn't mean much, but together started forming a pattern I couldn't unsee. I remember the first time I said something about it. We were at a party, and I caught her in the middle of what looked like a private moment with some guy I didn't know. They weren't touching, but the way they were talking, the way she tilted her head and leaned in, it made my stomach twist. "Jenna," I said later that night when we were alone. "What was that back there?" She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "What was what?" "You and that guy. You were... I don't know. You looked close." She rolled her eyes, her tone dismissive. "Oh, please. Don't be ridiculous. He's just a friend." Just a friend. That became her go-to defense every time I brought it up. Every time her behavior made me feel like I was competing for her attention, she'd wave it away with a laugh, accusing me of being jealous or insecure. And every time, I'd back down, convinced I was overreacting. But the feelings didn't go away. They lingered, gnawing at me in quiet moments, growing louder with every subtle flirtation, every brush-off, every time I felt like I wasn't enough for her. The worst part wasn't the flirting itself. It was the way Jenna handled it. Like it was my problem, not hers. She'd laugh off my concerns, turning them into jokes at my expense. "Oh, Ethan, you're so sensitive," she'd say, shaking her head. "It's cute, really." Cute. That word felt like a slap in the face. My discomfort wasn't cute. It was real, and it was eating away at the foundation of our marriage. But no matter how many times I tried to explain that to her, she never seemed to take it seriously. Over time, I started to wonder if I was the one who was wrong. Maybe I was being too sensitive, too insecure. Maybe Jenna was right, and this was just who she was. A social butterfly who thrived on connection. But even if that were true, where did that leave me? I didn't want to be the kind of husband who policed his wife's behavior or told her who she could and couldn't talk to. That wasn't the kind of relationship I wanted. But I also didn't want to feel like an afterthought in my own marriage, like I was constantly fighting for scraps of her attention while she gave her best self to everyone else. The turning point came about a year into these feelings. We were at another party, one of those glitzy, over-the-top events Jenna loved so much. She was in her element, mingling effortlessly while I hung back, nursing a drink and trying to blend into the background. That's when I saw it. Her standing across the room, laughing at something another man said. I didn't recognize him, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the way she looked at him, like he was the most interesting person in the world, like she was giving him a part of herself I hadn't seen in years. I felt something inside me snap. Not anger, exactly. More like resignation. This wasn't a one-time thing, and it wasn't going to change. Jenna loved the attention, the validation, the thrill of being wanted. And no matter how much I loved her, I couldn't compete with that. Later that night, when we were driving home, I tried one last time to reach her. "Jenna," I said, my voice steady but heavy. "Do you even see what you're doing to us?" She glanced at me, confused. "What are you talking about? You think I don't notice the way you act around other men?" I continued. "The way you light up for them, like I'm not even there?" For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, with a smirk, she said, "Oh, Ethan, you're imagining things. That was the moment I knew. Jenna wasn't going to change because she didn't think she needed to. To her, this was all in my head, a problem for me to fix, not her. I didn't say anything else that night. There was nothing left to say. But deep down, I knew our marriage was hanging by a thread, and that I wasn't the one holding the scissors. I should have known the night was going to be a disaster from the moment we arrived. The venue was one of those upscale hotels with chandeliers that looked like they'd cost more than my entire year's salary when I was starting out. Jenna, of course, looked stunning. She had on this emerald green dress that clung to her like it was made just for her, and her hair was styled in that effortless way that took hours to perfect. She was radiant, and she knew it. I, on the other hand, felt like an accessory, a prop meant to complete the picture of her perfect life. As we stepped into the room, she beamed at the crowd, her eyes scanning the faces like she was scouting her next audience. I stayed close at first, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with people I barely knew, but Jenna had already drifted into her element. That's how these events usually went. Jenna would mingle, and I'd stay back, trying to make small talk with someone equally disinterested. But tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air, subtle but undeniable, and it didn't take long to figure out why. It was him. He wasn't anyone I recognized, but it didn't matter. He was tall, well-dressed, and had that self-assured air of someone who had never heard the word no. I saw him standing near the bar, casually leaning against the counter with a drink in his hand, scanning the room like he was sizing up his options. And then his eyes landed on Jenna. She noticed him almost immediately, her lips curling into a faint smile as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't know if she even realized she did it. It was one of her tells, a subtle move that screamed, "Notice me." And notice her, he did. I tried to ignore it at first. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overreacting. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching something unfold in real time, like an inevitability I was powerless to stop. I stood by one of the high tables, sipping my drink and keeping an eye on Jenna as she worked the room. She was in her element, laughing and gesturing animatedly. But every so often, her gaze would drift back to the man at the bar. He wasn't just watching her. He was studying her, like she was a puzzle he couldn't wait to solve. When he finally made his move, it felt like slow motion. I watched as he approached her, his confident stride cutting through the crowd. Jenna turned to him, her face lighting up in a way that made my stomach twist. They exchanged a few words, and then she laughed, a laugh I hadn't heard in months, one that was full and genuine and all for him. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my composure. It wasn't like she was doing anything overtly wrong. They weren't touching, and from a distance it could have been mistaken for polite conversation. But I knew Jenna too well. I knew the tilt of her head, the way her eyes sparkled when she felt truly seen. And right now, she was giving him a version of herself I hadn't seen in a long time. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked over, forcing myself to keep my steps even and my expression calm. Jenna saw me approaching and smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ethan, there you are," she said, her tone bright and cheerful, like nothing was wrong. "This is Lucas. He works in PR." Lucas turned to me, extending a hand. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "you've got quite the wife here. She's been telling me all about your business ventures. Impressive stuff." I shook his hand, though the grip felt hollow. "Thanks," I said flatly. The three of us stood there for a moment, an awkward triangle of tension, before Jenna broke the silence. Lucas was just saying he's got some great ideas for expanding your client base, she said, her voice laced with enthusiasm. You two should talk. I forced a smile. Maybe later. I was actually hoping to steal you away for a bit, Jenna. We haven't had a chance to catch up all night. Her smile faltered just for a second, but she recovered quickly. Of course, she said, brushing her hand against my arm. Excuse us, Lucas. As we walked away, I leaned in close, keeping my voice low. You think I don't see you eyeing him from across the room? She stopped in her tracks, turning to face me with a smirk that made my blood boil. Then watch closely, she said, her voice calm but dripping with defiance. Because I'm about to give him a show. For a moment, I just stared at her, stunned. I'd expected her to deny it, to brush it off like she always did. But this was new. This was a boldness I didn't know she had, and it felt like a slap in the face. I leaned in, my voice cold and steady. And I'm about to give you a reality check. I'm gone before the music stops. Her smirk faltered, just slightly, but she quickly recovered. Oh, please, she said with a laugh, brushing me off like she always did. You're not going anywhere. But this time, she was wrong. For the rest of the night, I stayed back, watching as Jenna floated through the room like nothing had happened. She was radiant, charming, magnetic as always. But to me, she looked like a stranger, someone I no longer recognized, no longer wanted to fight for. By the time the night ended, I'd already made up my mind. The reality check wasn't for Jenna, it was for me. I couldn't keep pretending that this was something we could fix. I couldn't keep pretending that Jenna was someone she wasn't. As we left the party, walking to the car in silence, I felt a strange sense of calm. I knew what I had to do, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to do it. By the time we got home from the party, the silence between us was deafening. Jenna had spent the entire car ride scrolling through her phone, pretending like nothing had happened, like we hadn't exchanged the kind of words that left permanent cracks in a marriage. I drove in silence, my knuckles tight around the wheel, my mind racing with everything I'd been holding back for far too long. When we walked into the house, she kicked off her heels and went straight for the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine like it was any other night. I watched her from the doorway, half expecting her to say something, to acknowledge the conversation we'd had at the party. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned against the counter, swirling her glass and scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. I stood there for a moment, feeling a wave of disbelief. Was this really it? Was this how little she cared about us? About me? Part of me wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, to force her to admit what she'd been doing. But another part of me, the part that was exhausted from years of trying to hold us together, just wanted to walk away. You really don't care, do you? I finally said, my voice calm but heavy. She glanced up at me, her expression unreadable. Care about what? She asked, her tone bored. About us. About what you've done to this marriage. About how you've treated me. Jenna sighed, setting her glass down on the counter. Ethan, you're being dramatic again. Nothing happened. I talked to a guy at a party. Big deal. It's not just about the party, Jenna, I said, stepping into the kitchen. It's about everything. The flirting, the dismissiveness, the way you make me feel like I'm the last thing on your mind when I'm supposed to be your husband. She rolled her eyes. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Why can't you just let it go? Because I'm done letting it go, I snapped, my voice rising for the first time that night. I've let it go 100 times, Jenna. I've ignored the way you act around other men. I've swallowed my pride every time you made me feel small. I've tried to be patient, to talk to you, to make this work, but you don't care. You've never cared. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of defensiveness. That's not fair, she said, crossing her arms. I've done plenty for this marriage. Like what? I asked, my voice quieter but no less intense. What have you done, Jenna? Because from where I'm standing, all you've done is take. My time, my energy, my love, and you've given nothing in return. She opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, her expression hardening. You know what, Ethan? Maybe this marriage was a mistake. Maybe we're just not right for each other. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but instead of breaking me, they solidified something inside me. She wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to fight for us, and I was done fighting for someone who couldn't even admit there was a problem. Maybe you're right, I said, my voice cold and steady. Maybe this was a mistake, but I'll tell you one thing. It's a mistake I'm not going to keep making. I turned and walked toward the bedroom, leaving Jenna standing in the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I grabbed a bag from the closet and started packing. I didn't take much, just the essentials. Clothes, toiletries, a few personal items. The rest could stay. None of it mattered anymore. Jenna appeared in the doorway, her arms still crossed. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I'm leaving," I said simply, not bothering to look at her. "I told you at the party, Jenna, I'm done. You can give your show to whoever you want, but I won't be here to see it." She laughed, but it was hollow. "You're not serious." I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder, turning to face her. I've never been more serious in my life. For a moment, she just stared at me, like she couldn't quite believe what was happening. Then her expression shifted to something resembling panic. "Ethan, come on, you're overreacting. This is ridiculous." "No," I said, walking past her toward the door. "What's ridiculous is how long I stayed, thinking things would change. But they won't. You won't." I didn't wait for her to respond. I walked out the door, letting it close behind me with a finality that felt like a weight lifting off my chest. As I got into my car and drove away, I didn't feel anger or sadness, just a strange, bittersweet sense of relief. I was done being her audience, her safety net, her afterthought. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. When I left that night, I made a decision. No more explanations, no more arguments, and no more trying to make her see what she didn't want to. Jenna had always been a master at twisting conversations, turning my valid concerns into accusations of insecurity or overreaction. But not this time. This time, I wasn't giving her the chance. The text started almost immediately. The first one came in just as I pulled into the parking lot of the hotel where I'd booked a room. "Ethan, seriously? Where are you? Come home so we can talk." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say, and honestly, I didn't trust myself to say it calmly if I did. I turned off my phone and tossed it onto the hotel room desk, collapsing onto the bed with a mix of exhaustion and relief. The next morning, when I turned my phone back on, it buzzed nonstop with messages. They ranged from annoyed to pleading to outright angry. "You're acting like a child. I didn't do anything wrong and you're making this into a huge deal. Ethan, stop ignoring me. We need to talk about this." Still, I didn't respond. Every word she sent only solidified my decision to leave. She wasn't apologizing or even acknowledging her actions, just trying to regain control of a situation she thought she could manipulate, like always. By the third day, the tone of her messages shifted. The defiance and annoyance gave way to something closer to desperation. "Ethan, I'm sorry, okay? Can we please just talk? I promise I'll listen this time." That word, listen, might have meant something a few months ago, but now, it felt hollow. Jenna had plenty of opportunities to listen before. She'd had chances to see how her actions affected me, to take responsibility, to show me that our marriage mattered to her. But she hadn't, and now it was too late. As the days passed, the messages became less frequent but more emotional. "I miss you. Please don't do this. We can fix this. I know we can." I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I might. Her words didn't sting the way they once would have, but they didn't bring closure either. If anything, they just made me sad. Not for me, but for what we'd lost. For what we could have been if she'd cared enough to try before it all fell apart. I started to hear about Jenna's reaction through mutual friends. One of them, Tom, called me out of the blue. "Ethan, man," he said, his tone cautious. "I ran into Jenna the other day. She told me what happened." "Did she?" I replied, my voice flat. "Yeah, she's not handling it great. She said she doesn't understand why you left, that it came out of nowhere." I laughed bitterly at that. Out of nowhere? Really? "She's spinning it like you just walked out without warning," Tom admitted. But I told her, "Look, Ethan's been dealing with this for a long time." She didn't want to hear it, though. "Of course she didn't," I said, shaking my head. "Jenna's good at ignoring the parts of reality she doesn't like." Tom hesitated. "I'm not saying you should go back or anything, but maybe you should at least talk to her. Give her some closure." "Closure?" I repeated, incredulous. "Tom, I spent years trying to talk to her, trying to fix things, trying to get her to take any of this seriously. She didn't care then, so why should I believe she cares now?" Tom didn't have an answer for that, and neither did I. Over the next few weeks, the texts slowed to a trickle. Every once in a while, I'd get one late at night, messages that felt raw, unfiltered, and drenched in regret. "I don't know how we got here. I miss us. I'm sorry." But by then, it was too little, too late. Her apologies felt like they were for her own sake, not mine. Like she wanted to absolve herself of guilt more than she wanted to make things right. I didn't block her number. I didn't have to. Ignoring her messages wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting myself. Every time she reached out, it felt like she was pulling at a thread I'd finally managed to cut. I wasn't going to let her unravel me again. One night, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out over the city. My phone buzzed beside me, and for a moment, I considered picking it up. But when I saw her name on the screen, I just sighed and let it go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear her voice to know what she'd say. The same excuses, the same promises, the same empty words that had kept me hanging on for far too long. But I wasn't that person anymore. I'd learned to stop waiting for Jenna to change. Now it was time to focus on changing myself. The weeks after I left were a strange mix of freedom and uncertainty. On one hand, I felt like a weight had been lifted. I no longer had to endure Jenna's dismissive attitude or the constant ache of feeling second best. On the other hand, I was stepping into a void. For so long, my life had revolved around our marriage, trying to fix it, trying to make it work. Now, for the first time, I had to figure out what life looked like without her. I moved into a small apartment downtown. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with basic furniture and a view of the parking lot, but it felt like mine. No shared closets, no reminders of Jenna in every corner, no tension lingering in the air. Just a clean slate. I unpacked my things slowly, deliberately, finding a strange sense of satisfaction in the simplicity of it all. Work became my sanctuary. I poured myself into my projects, staying late at the office, taking on tasks I'd avoided for months. It wasn't about avoiding the pain, though I won't lie. That was part of it. It was about regaining control, proving to myself that I was capable of thriving on my own. My colleagues noticed the change. "You seem different," one of them said during a lunch break. "More focused." I just nodded. "I guess I've got fewer distractions now." Outside of work, I started reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in ages. Jenna's social whirlwind had always taken precedence, and somewhere along the way, I'd let my own relationships fade into the background. Now, I reached out to those old friends, meeting them for coffee or a beer, rediscovering the people who had always been there, even when I hadn't made time for them. One of those friends, Mark, convinced me to join him for a weekend hike. "You need to get out of the city," he said. "Clear your head." Trust me, it'll help. I wasn't sure about it. Nature had never been my thing, but I agreed. And he was right. Standing on the edge of a cliff, looking out over miles of untouched wilderness, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The noise in my head quieted, replaced by the sound of the wind and the rustling trees. It was a reminder that the world was so much bigger than my problems, that life went on regardless of the messes we made. That hike was a turning point. I started making time for myself in ways I hadn't before. I took up running, finding solace in the rhythm of my footsteps and the steady burn in my muscles. I signed up for a cooking class, learning how to make meals that didn't come from a takeout menu. I even started reading again, losing myself in books that had nothing to do with work or self-help, just stories that reminded me of the joy in escape. While I was finding my footing, Jenna's life seemed to be unraveling. I didn't go looking for updates, but they found me anyway, carried by the whispers of mutual friends and the occasional social media posts that crossed my path. "She's not doing great," Tom mentioned one day over coffee. "She was at a party last weekend and it wasn't pretty. You know how she used to light up a room? It's not like that anymore." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt vindicated. Jenna was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I fell in love with, felt a pang of sadness. Not pity, exactly, but something close to it. The stories kept coming. Jenna had thrown herself into the social scene even harder than before, but it wasn't working. The charm that had once captivated everyone around her seemed to be wearing thin. Friends who used to hang on her every word were growing tired of the drama, the constant need for attention. And without me there to pick up the pieces or provide the stability she'd taken for granted, her life was slipping out of her control. Then there were the texts. They came less frequently now, but when they did, they were more raw, more desperate. "I don't know how to do this without you. Everything feels wrong. I miss us. Please, Ethan, just talk to me." I never responded. Not because I didn't care. I'd cared for so long it nearly broke me. But because I knew that talking to her wouldn't help either of us. Jenna needed to face her reality, just like I'd faced mine. She needed to understand that some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. One day, I got a call from one of her closer friends. "Ethan, I hate to bother you, but I think you should know. Jenna's really struggling. She's not herself. Maybe she just needs to hear from you." "I appreciate you telling me," I said, keeping my tone measured. "But I don't think reaching out will fix anything. She has to figure this out on her own." The friend sighed, clearly disappointed but not surprised. "I get it. I just thought you should know." The truth is, hearing about Jenna's struggles didn't bring me any joy. It didn't bring me closure either. It just reminded me of how far we'd drifted, how much we'd both lost in the process. But it also reinforced something I'd been learning since the day I walked out. I couldn't save her. I couldn't fix her. All I could do was take care of myself and hope that one day she'd find a way to do the same. As I sat in my apartment that night, staring out at the city lights, I realized something. Jenna's spiral wasn't my burden anymore. It wasn't my responsibility to catch her when she fell. My responsibility was to myself, to the life I was rebuilding, to the person I was becoming. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.